The budget is, of course, the other big story, well, the biggest story, perhaps, for the nation. And that's happening tomorrow when Enoch, the finance minister, will be delivering his budget speech, whereafter, of course, Parliament will have to process it through their various committees. What's most likely to come up tomorrow? Well, a VAT hike may be off the table, but don't breathe easy just yet. With Treasury tight on cash, the fuel levy could be next in line for a bump when Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana delivers Budget 3.0 tomorrow. Business reporter Ntokozo Khumalo joins us now to unpack what that could mean for consumers and the fuel industry. Bit of a perfect storm, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Good afternoon, Vuyo. And the fuel levy, of course, there are other considerations that are on the table to close that gap. The medical aid credits being cut being one of those, as well as allowing that, tax bracket creep to come in. But the reason that, a lot of economists and analysts are concerned about the fuel levy is because it cuts really across the board, from the poorest of the poor to middle class, high income earners. All of us need to be able to transport in some form or another. And the fuel levy, government has put a freeze on it since 2022, Vuyo, just on the back of the COVID-19 pandemic, giving South Africans a little bit of that cushion from the pandemic and the rising cost of living. Another R1.50 per litre fuel levy cuts were seen in April and May of 2022. While it helped consumers, though, Vuyo, it did mean less revenue for governments. In the 2023 financial year, it raised over 82 billion rand from the fuel levy. So we can see why there might be value for Finance Minister to consider raising that fuel levy. But it does show the tricky balancing act of ensuring that, the citizens are okay and have that relief with that long-term fiscal responsibility. And speaking of industry, I did earlier speak to Essential Fuels. They are a fuel wholesaler with specialization in the downstream oil and fuel petroleum products, and they are calling for instead the Treasury to actually consider cutting the fuel levy. So let's take a listen to what the managing director Enoch had to say in that regard.
Do pay a lot more than other countries for fuel. Considering Namibia, that's got the same import sources as we do, and a lot of our volume, or majority of our volumes, are imported. The fuel is significantly cheaper that side. And for our country at the moment where it is economically,
I do feel that a reduction in the fuel levy would actually see a bigger economical outturn,
which would, at the end of the day, substantiate the amount of revenue that the government needs, because they've effectively then helped the industry grow, not just the fuel industry, but the whole industry in South Africa, all parts of industry.
I mean, households, consumers are under enormous pressure at the moment. They would probably agree with the industry organization that, if anything, would rather pay less than pay more.
Absolutely. And I think, Vuyo, considering the perfect economic storm that this week is, because it's not just the budget that, businesses are looking out for, average South Africans looking out for, but also that meeting that Zianda just updated us on out of the US on how those tariffs could potentially then add on to the pressure. So if the fuel hike is increased, and the meeting between US Presidents Donald Trump and Ramaphosa does not go as hoped, what would that mean, again, for the plans that industry needs to make? Jose also highlighted something that I think we probably need to dig into a little bit deeper when it comes to fuel prices. Consumers have enjoyed some cuts over the last few months, but that could come to an end very shortly if we don't see that trade relationship with the US being reset, and if we see a fuel levy increase. But I did speak to Enoch, again, the managing director at Essential Fuels, asking him just what the industry is looking for when it comes to that meeting with Ramaphosa and Donald Trump. And this is what he had to say, Vuyo.
at the back of the or basically at the beginning of a whole refining process, that's where it influences our industry. For example, if this meeting goes well, the rand dollar might stabilize, which in turn lowers the cost of crude, the cost of the imported fuel as well to South Africa, and that would lower our fuel prices. If the meeting does not go well and stronger tariffs are installed, it would have a negative impact on our rand dollar. The other part is if it goes well and there is no tariff hike, the US 30 should do better, which means there might be a reduction in the crude prices, which would also reduce your Platts prices, which is what your fuel prices are based off when it's traded on a global scale. And that would also lower our prices. But should both of them go sour, the rand dollar would increase, which immediately impacts our import prices. And that would also implement the Platts prices that we're paying. So we would hope the meeting goes well. It influences all parts of industry, especially the fact that we work with majority imported stock. And we would want that to go well to decrease what we're paying for stock.
If not at the fuel levy, where else then? Does Enoch Godongwana look?
Well, the other only two options that most economists and analysts seem to think he could look is cutting, of course, those medical aid credits that does, subsidize certain income brackets. That could bring in about 1.5 billion, which is small amounts when you consider what is needed to close that gap, but it is progress. Also, we may not see those adjustments in the tax brackets, allowing then, of course, for that tax bracket creep to come in. But outside of that, it's hard to imagine where else Treasury would look to find that money. They can't cut grants. They can't afford to cut on even some of the social relief grants that have been up for debates, that maybe it is time to get rid of those. But, with the stories that I've been doing over the last few weeks, a lot more South African workers clearly needing that grant relief. So also on the expenditure side, the GNU has grown larger in size, and in fact, that is where a lot of analysts are saying government could get a lot of buck for or money out of there if they reduce that cabinet. But of course, that is something that takes time, Vuyo. It's not something that could happen over the past 2 weeks or so that the Treasury has been engaging. So it seems a tightrope that Finance Minister will walk once again.
How many times? I mean, we've had that line with every budget that comes, but even more so this time, I suppose. Ntokozo Khumalo, part of our team that will be bringing you the budget